man, if I could be happy, at one point, just a small mattress on the floor and no furniture. Once I knew I could do that and I could live and be happy with that, it removed all constraints that I previously had self-assigned to myself because of the way society. The bigger the company, the less impact you can have. As startups, it's about you have to be proactive. If you're not proactive, you're not doing your job. The people that ended up meeting that had obviously a very material impact were my Branch co-founders, right? Like you can learn all of that information online. And between YouTube videos, between podcasts, an MBA can give certain people is a network. I had no network in that world. I didn't even know how to break into it because as a mechanical engineer, it would have been very hard for me to get a job when I was broke and had nowhere to live. That support system gave me a place to stay. I slept on couches for 3 months. An MBA isn't required, isn't necessary, may not even be the best path. For me, I felt it was the best path largely because it helped me build the network. And so at that point, I didn't have any money. We had to look back on ultimately what our mission was. And our mission was to start a company. I believe anyone can do anything, but when you're comfortable, when you're used to a certain way of life, it can be hard to imagine yourself doing something different. Take the risk, the thing that seems scary, because you'll realize it's actually not that bad.
Hi, welcome to the second part of Mike's journey. Here you will get to know how he handled himself mentally when he was broke and how it ended up empowering him in his journey.
Can you talk about how is the entrepreneurial journey different from the employee journey, especially in big corporates? Like you worked in 3M, right? How is it different way different from that? And I believe there will be lots of unknowns when you start, right? A huge amount of unknowns. There will be very less people who can guide you. Maybe when you are small, right? How do you navigate through that journey?
Yeah. So there's a lot of differences. So one is first and foremost is the outcome or the impact that you can have, right? At a big company as an employee, as an employee in general, but I think really you're talking like big companies. The bigger the company, the less impact you can have. If you're at 1,000-person company, you can still have some impact, but it's less than if you're at a 10-person company. If you're at a 100,000-person company, the impact you're going to have is very small. Now, what you might say is like, hey, I can have a small impact on a large number of users. That's a fair way of looking at it, which is cool. That's awesome, right? Like, hey, I can do this one small feature, but it hits 1 billion users. That's cool. What I always thought was, if I'm not here, how replaceable am I? If I'm not here, if I don't show up for a month or 3 months, will my boss notice? Will my boss care? And if I worked really hard and put in 80-hour weeks, or I barely worked and I put in 20-hour weeks, what is the difference? Is it going to make a material difference on the output, the outcome, on my personal career trajectory? And as an employee, the answer tends to, especially at larger companies, tends to be less so. Like it tends to be no, like it doesn't matter, right? And I noticed this because when I was at 3M, I worked harder than most people. I was in the office later. I put in more effort. I put more time in on the weekends. And I compared that against people that did the bare minimum, just enough to keep their job. And the difference between those two was pretty immaterial. Versus if you're at a 15-person company and you do the bare minimum versus you kick ass and work your ass off, the difference between that is like this person's getting fired probably, and this person's growing and making the actual business more successful. They're actually having a material impact on the trajectory of that business, and they're getting promoted and they're growing as the business grows. So like the closer you get to smaller and smaller companies, whether it be as an entrepreneur or even as an employee at a 10, 15, 20-person company, that the effort you put in makes a greater and greater impact. And that was like the big thing for me. And that was why I was so frustrated, because as somebody that has a high work ethic, that takes pride in their work, that wants to sacrifice, wants to do a lot, wants to have an impact, to then be in a big company where there was no impact, irrespective of whether I put in 80 hours. That was when really the first sign of me saying like, okay, maybe I want to change something. So that's the first thing, outcome and impact. Second thing, reactive versus proactive. And this, again, all this applies for entrepreneurs as founders, but also the early employees, first 50 or whatever employees at a company. Reactive versus proactive. At a big company or as an employee, you tend to be reactive, right? Like I was told to do something, I'm going to go do it. You're just a cog in the machine. As startups, it's about you have to be proactive. If you're not proactive, you're not doing your job. If you're waiting to be told what to do, you're doing it wrong. And you need to be proactive at finding things to do, finding the most valuable things to do and acting on them. There's more work than there are people to do the work. And there's not enough time to tell people like, this is what we need to go do. So being proactive is key. Third, this is just top of mind because I was chatting about it today with somebody, but there's no frameworks, there's no structure, there's no playbooks. As an entrepreneur, as an early employee, if you're looking to follow some sort of framework or structure or playbook, that's not the right approach because you're so early that you need to figure out product market fit, and it's too early to be able to apply things versus when you get to a later stage company, when you're an employee at a later stage company or at a big company, it's like, okay, we follow this structure, we follow this playbook. Like that's fine when you want to replicate it, but it's a totally different approach. And yeah, it's just not repeatable. You're not trying to rinse and repeat. You're trying to actually just figure things out and learn. Okay, number 4 is ambiguity. There's no structure, there's no clarity, there's no concreteness around things like the goals, metrics, like where you're going 6 months from now, right? And so at a startup or as a founder, it gets shorter and shorter time frame in which you have predictability, down to, I would argue, maybe days or week or maybe a couple weeks, versus at big companies, you're talking years out. You're talking, you already know in 2023 what your roadmap probably decently looks like in 2024, what your goals are going to be like on your revenue side for 2025 and 2026. You're looking 3 years out at these big companies. At a startup, you're like, we don't know what our goals should be. We're not even going to, like, it's so unknown and ambiguous. We're not even going to set those goals because we just need to learn and we just need to go figure things out. And so that ambiguity can be really paralyzing for some people that just don't know how to operate in that environment. But for people that really thrive in that world, it can be really good and invigorating, because some people like me, the later you get and the more it's like, okay, we're going to talk about goals 3 years from now and what our 2026 revenue numbers should be. Like, okay, but that's like pretty easy. It's not easy, but it takes the work, but it's like, okay, cool. We can work backwards. And then it's just an equation of what you need to do to actually solve to get there. Right. And that's less fun. So those are the 4 things.
Yeah, great. Now, can you talk about, like, I believe you went to Stanford MBA, right? Can you talk about how did you actually think about going there? Why did you think about going there? And how was your journey in Stanford? What are the kind of incidents or let's say the people you met that actually shaped you in your future journey?
Yeah. I mean, on the people side, there's a couple things. One is co-founders and then one is the support system. So the people that ended up meeting that had obviously a very material impact were my Branch co-founders, right? So Alex and then Mata, and then a little bit later, Dimitri, who became our 4th co-founder with Kindred, and then we pivoted into Branch. And so the 4 of us ended up building Branch together, right? And we met through Stanford. And that was the big thing for me. When I was choosing to go to do my MBA, it was, I want to start a business. In order to do that, I need to build a network. In order to do that, I think an MBA is going to be a great way to do that, right? You don't have to do that. You don't have to do an MBA. One of the things that I tell a lot of people is, especially people that might ask me that work with us at whether it's Branch or the new company, is like, you don't need to get an MBA. If you're looking to go for the education, a lot of that, I mean, it's all online, right? Like you can learn all of that information or most of it online and between YouTube videos, between podcasts, etc. What I think an MBA can give certain people is a network. And that's the thing that for me, I didn't have, right? I was living in Minnesota. I was working in 3M. I was a mechanical engineer and I wanted to get into Silicon Valley tech and software, especially. I had no network in that world. And I didn't even know how to break into it because as a mechanical engineer, it would have been very hard for me to get a job working at a tech company. And so Stanford was, when I got in, I knew Stanford was my path to that would maximize my chances of success in building that network, which then I would hopefully be able to, use to find the right co-founders and find the right team and then build a company. And it worked out that way. I'm very fortunate. I'm very lucky I was able to do that. The second thing on the people side that besides co-founders was the support system. So being a founder, an entrepreneur is not easy, right? There's a lot of challenges or a lot of issues. And so one of the things that you need is a good support system. And that support system, for example, when I was broke and had nowhere to live, that support system gave me a place to stay. I slept on couches for 3 months. I couch surfed for 3 months when we were working on Kindred. And all those people, they were my support system, right? Like I would spend a week at a different place, sleeping on different couches. And I was able to do that because I had that support system like that. And so that was really incredible. And I wouldn't be where I am today without without that support system and without those people that helped me along the way. So that's a big thing. Now, if somebody's thinking, hey, should I get an MBA if I want to start a business? I'd say there's no one size fits all answer, right? So everyone's different. I would look at a few different things. I would look at what's your background. I would look at, are you going for the network or are you going for the education you can get elsewhere? I would say if you have an idea, is it your time better spent working on that idea for 2 years or doing an MBA for 2 years? Not that, you can't do both, but it's a distraction. If you're working on an idea, you're not focused on it 100%. You're, best case, if you invest really hard, you're focused on it maybe 50%. And then the third is, where do you want to spend your money, right? Because if you're going to go to a full-time MBA program, it may cost you $150,000 or more to do that. And could you instead spend that money trying to get your idea off the ground? And so for most people, I would argue that an MBA isn't required, isn't necessary, may not even be the best path. For me, I felt it was the best path largely because it helped me build the network.
Cool. Yeah. Can you talk about how did you end up getting, you talked about you were broke for some time, right? Like how did you get to that situation? How did it take you in terms of mental toll, right? How did it impact you? And how did you have the courage even at that time to actually go for entrepreneurship?
Okay, first of all, how did I become broke? During the MBA. So when I worked at 3M, I built up a small amount of savings. Then when I went to get my MBA, I had to spend all of my savings. After the first year, I'd spent all of my savings and I'd started to accumulate credit card debt and I didn't have student loans coming in anymore. And so at that point, I didn't have any money. And that was actually the point at which I considered possibly taking an internship instead or working at a company, because when somebody's offering you a paycheck, like this is the scary thing for entrepreneurs, when you almost get sucked into that siren song or that appeal of having a secure job. That's why I talked about expected value. Like, yes, you can have the predictability and the comfort and the security of having a job, which is going to pay you whatever it's going to pay you, but you lose the opportunity to pursue entrepreneurship and you lose that freedom. And so it was a very tough decision when I was broke and didn't have a place to live, because I was looking at the next 3 months, 4 months, and I was like, shit, I don't have a place to live. What am I going to do? At that moment, I decided to place the bet. And I was talking to Mata about this too, because she was in a similar situation. She didn't have very much money. She was thinking about taking an internship. But we both kind of talked to each other and were like, we had to look back on ultimately what our mission was. And our mission was to start a company. And so we knew that we could suffer through the short-term pain if it meant pursuing that longer-term mission. And I think that's the important thing. Like, I'm a big fan of compressing the pain and just being like, you know what, long-term, I want to do this thing. I believe anyone can do anything for a certain period of time, a few months, a few years. Like, we are adaptable, but when you're comfortable, when you're used to a certain way of life, it can be hard to imagine yourself doing something different. What I encourage people to do is just go do that. Take that risk, because you know what? Couch surfing wasn't that bad. And if anything, there was some advantages to it, meeting new people and hanging out with people that I otherwise wouldn't have hung out with. And it really reset my baseline for what's possible, because after that, I knew, shit, if I could be broke and couch surf for 3 months and survive, that totally changes what's in my mind, what's possible. And before that, up until that moment, I'd always kind of had a certain, certain bar or a certain level at which I thought like, okay, this is like, I wouldn't do this, or, this is possible. And then you realize, wow, like I can do more than I thought. And if I run out of money, it's actually not that bad, because I'm not going to go hungry. Right. And this is, I'm very fortunate living in the US, having good friends and, having a network. I'm not worried about going hungry, which is not always the case for some people. Some people, they have families or they have some other constraint that makes it harder. And I recognize that. And so not everyone can do this, but that was a big thing. So when you said, how did I have the courage to do that it was hard, but looking back on it, I don't know. It doesn't feel that courageous. I think it's more just we overestimate risk and we underestimate upside. And so when we put too much emphasis on the risk or the downside or the thing that's scary that we haven't done before, it can cause us to make suboptimal decisions. And so I encourage a lot of people, to take the risk, the thing that seems scary, because you'll realize is actually not that bad. And, especially if you're surrounded by a good support network, good group of people, you have friends, etc. So take the risk, because usually the upside's great and the downside isn't too bad.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Can we say that it's more of like it's empowering you, it empowered you in future rather than scaring you? I think it ended up showing you that maybe you can actually live in terms of the kind of mental level that you have made, that okay, this is the kind of life I can live, and I can't live lower. Like you actually saw that okay, I can live on
Yeah,
the couch for so many, and it's so empowering, right? Now you can like say, okay, there's nothing to lose for me, right?
exactly. Yeah. I think that's a great word, empowered. That's what it did. It empowered me to take more risks because now I realize that I didn't need very much to be happy. Because I think up until that point, you fill life with things. You want a nicer car, you want a bigger apartment, you want good furniture. Like it turns out, because for 2.5 years after that, when we were starting Branch, I lived in a garage, right? Like, and I didn't have furniture. I had a bed. That was it. And I was just as happy then as I've been any other time in my life. Arguably happier then because I had fewer things to weigh me down. What I realized was like, man, if I could be happy having like at one point just a small mattress on the floor and no furniture, then like that was really empowering because then I knew like the absolute worst case pretty much is you can't have a new car, a nice car, you can't have nice furniture, and you just have a mattress on the floor in a tiny room, and that's it. I'm like, okay. Once I knew I could do that and I could live and be happy with that, it removed all constraints that I previously had self-assigned to myself because of the way society had made me think about what's success or what isn't success. That was incredibly empowering. And so like for aspiring entrepreneurs, I'd encourage you to get out, do something like that. And so even since then, even for the last 10 years, I've tried to minimize the amount of physical things that I own. And I try to minimize how much I indulge in terms of like possessions because one, they weigh me down because I have to think about them, right? I have to like worry about the things that I own. And then two, it kind of having things lulls me into this like comfort zone of, oh, well, I don't want to take a risk because I've gotten so comfortable with this lifestyle. And so I try to be very careful about that because I don't want to get comfortable because I want to have the freedom to be able to go take more risks. And frankly, that's what I've done right now, right? I was recently co-founded another company. And I think if I'm too comfortable and weighed myself down with too many belongings or too high of a lifestyle, it would have been hard to go back to the beginning and take a risk on another startup. But because I'd kind of trained myself to not have those things and to not get weighed down too much, it's freed me up to be able to take this risk again.
Yeah. Thanks for going deep dive into that. Yeah. Cool. Thanks a lot, man. I'll not take much of your time. And thanks a lot for doing this. I think it will be super great. Actually, we had a really good, nice conversation.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, it is fun, and I always enjoy and happy to share my journey and my lessons and my learnings really from that. So
Yeah. Cool. Thanks.
Thanks for watching this episode. The next episode will be out soon.